All right,
Okay,
got it going.
great. Thank you everyone for joining us for our September or our one of two September Virtual Water Ambassador Program webinar series. The Water Ambassador Program is a partnership program between Martin County and University of Florida IFAS Extension, Florida Sea Grant Program, and it is a stormwater education program to help educate and engage and encourage Florida residents to have a voice and a role to play in our water quality, starting with stormwater. So following today, we only have one more webinar for the 2024 webinar series. It's about the potential nutrient impacts of reclaimed water irrigation overspray. And this is on September 17th. We will put the registration link in the chat as always. And next Thursday is our second and last field trip, which is going to be led by Conor. We will be visiting Florida Oceanographic Society, meeting at 9 a.m. This is a space-limited field trip. We only have space for 15 people, and we are about halfway filled. So register now if you want to join us. We'll put the registration link in the chat as well. But we do ask that if you have registered and you are no longer going to be able to join us, that you let us know so that we can make sure that we use all the space that we have. As always, we'll be recording this. So webinars, previous webinars and current webinars are all posted on the UF IFAS Extension Martin County YouTube page. And you can find all of the webinar recordings from this year under the 2024 Water Ambassador Program playlist. We also have previous years posted, so you can feel free to watch any topic that's of interest to you. Today's webinar is going to be slightly different, and we're really, really excited about this model that we're doing. So we are actually going to be screening a documentary. It's about a 12-minute documentary. And then we're going to have expert panel where you all can ask questions to the panel about seagrass restoration. We are going to be using the chat feature to ask questions. So we ask that as we screen the documentary or as we have our Q&A panel discussion, that all of your questions get typed into the chat box. And Vincent and myself will be moderating those questions and reading them within the order that they come. So please utilize that chat box to make sure that we have some great discussion today. At this point, because today's whole conversation is about seagrasses, I'm going to turn it over to Vincent. We're sort of dedicating today's webinar presentation to a scientist that we recently lost. So Vincent, you want to say a few words?
Yeah, hold on, just give me a second here. Yeah, I just wanted to say, well, first of all, thank you for everybody for joining. And before we start the movie and introduce our panelists after the movie, I just wanted to recognize Dr. Dennis Hanasak on the left there with two of our panelists, Drs. Lauren Hall and Dr. Lori Morris from the St. John's River Water Management District. Dennis passed away this past May. And when Lisa and I first discussed this idea of screening the movie with Conor and having this panel discussion, Dennis was, as typically for myself, always my go-to person and the first person I was going to ask to serve on the panel discussion. And unfortunately, I never got to that point. And a lot of us that are working in the Indian River Lagoon recognize Dennis and his impact on all of us and his role in seagrass ecology from in the Indian River Lagoon since I think he started at Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute in 1977. So yeah, he had a long history. I'm gonna also, there's a number of nice tributes to him online that I can post in the chat as the movie's going along. So I just wanted to take this brief moment to recognize his influence and impact. He was always very kind and gracious to me, especially with all my naive seagrass questions. and of course, very informative and helpful. Um, so anyway, I just wanted to take this to recognize him as a friend and a colleague, and dedicate this little event to him in his honor.
Great. Thank you,
Thanks,
Vincent.
Lisa.
And oh, what happened to? There we go. And so I am excited to present our expert panelists for today's discussion. We're going to, as I said, we're going to start by screening the movie Emerald Sanctuary, which is a documentary investigating the impacts of seagrasses on the environment and the culture of Florida, as well as their necessity to maintain a healthy biodiversity. The movie was directed by Dr. Conor MacDonnell, who's one of our panelists here today, and he's going to provide a little bit of an introduction about the movie. But I'm going to, in alphabetical order, I'm going to introduce our panelists to you. Ryan Brushwood. Ryan is the Vice President of Environmental Science at Sea and Shoreline. He leads a team of biologists who have designed, permitted, and managed dozens of seagrass and submerged aquatic vegetation restoration projects throughout the state of Florida, in areas such as the Indian River Lagoon, Crystal River, and the Caloosahatchee River. Lauren Hall. Lauren is an environmental scientist with the St. Johns River Water Management District. Lauren's been monitoring seagrass and macroalgae for over 28 years. She's the project manager for the biannual mapping of seagrass, tracking changes in extent throughout the lagoon. Conor. Dr. Conor MacDonnell is a University of Florida marine ecologist with a focus in seagrasses. Conor currently works with the Florida Oceanographic Society, improving the effectiveness and efficiency of seagrass restoration with an emphasis on incorporating public outreach and awareness. Lori Morris has been with St. Johns River Water Management District for 32 years. Her focus has been on the ecology of seagrass habitats in the Indian River Lagoon. During her career at the district, she's been responsible for standardizing surveys of fixed seagrass transects throughout the lagoon. And last but not least, Dr. Lorraine Simpson is an estuarine ecologist with 15 years of research and restoration experience in the Indian River Lagoon. And though she didn't want to admit it, she is currently the supervising environmental scientist for the Coastal Basin Program at the St. Johns River Water Management District. So I hope you'll agree that we have a fantastic panel of experts that are here this morning to, or I guess we're afternoon now, to answer your seagrass restoration questions. So I am going to...
Lisa, really quick. Also in the room is Bob Virnstein.
Oh.
Bob is a longtime seagrass ecologist, in the Indian River Lagoon, and a longtime colleague of all, particularly Lori and Lauren, for many years.
Apologies, Bob, for that oversight, and thank you so much for joining us. So at this point, I am going to share my screen, and we are going to watch the Emerald Sanctuary documentary. Conor is going to give us a brief introduction, but I do want to state, if for any reason you are having issues watching the video as I share it with you all, Vincent is also going to be putting the link in the chat so that you can sort of ignore my screen, pull it up on your own computer and watch it on your own screen. It's freely available on YouTube, so that just in case, to make sure that we have no connectivity issues. So before I do that, Conor, I'm going to open it up to you, and if you can provide us a little bit of introduction about the making of the movie.
Thank you, Lisa, and I'm really excited to share this documentary short with everyone. To give you a little bit of background on seagrasses, I'm assuming that many of you are well aware of how important seagrasses are in Florida, but I think it's important to provide a general overview of the fact that we have more seagrass in Florida than any other state on the US coast. And it's an integral part of not only our environment, but also our culture. So fishing, ecotourism, boating, that's all really intimately connected with seagrass ecosystems. And we've lost tens of thousands of acres of this ecosystem in the last couple of decades, but it doesn't receive the same coverage as other ecosystems like our coral reefs. So this documentary is sort of a response to this issue, trying to fill the gap, trying to educate the general public on what seagrasses are, why they're important, and a potential solution to this significant problem in our state, and hopefully something that can be applied through the entire country, or some stuff can be applied worldwide. To give you some background on the actual project itself, it was funded through Project Paradise, which is a nonprofit dedicated to creating environmental documentaries in the state of Florida. And some of our collaborators included Blair Wiggins, University of Florida, Florida Oceanographic Society, and Save Crystal River. So really excited for you all to see this, and hope it makes a difference in the state of seagrass and our great state of Florida.
Thank you so much, Connor, and thank you for allowing us to share it with the water ambassadors. Okay, so now the moment of truth. I'm going to start presenting. Are you all seeing this? Okay, great. I'm going to mute myself and press play.
Lisa, there's
I'm
no sound.
getting no sound.
Of course, no matter how many times you do this, something's not going to work. Okay, hold on. Let me try this again.
What makes life in the Nature Coast so special is just the natural beauty of this place. It's more Florida than the rest of Florida in my eyes. So the reason I care so much about seagrass is it drives the economy that I'm a part of. And I mean, to be honest with you, it's beautiful out there. I love seeing the fish. I love seeing the environment. It makes the fishing here very, very good. So I'm very concerned with the state of the seagrass in the entire state of Florida. Seeing the rest of Florida having issues with seagrass is terrifying, because I'm scared that one day that's going to happen here. We need to find a way to fix the rest of Florida, and we need to find a way to preserve this part of Florida and prevent it from getting to that point. I get a tremendous amount of joy out of taking people that have never seen this area out on the water. Fishing's fishing. It's great when we catch a ton of fish and have a great day, but from the second we get out there, they're in awe before they even see their first fish, just because the natural beauty of this place is unlike anywhere in the world. The three big tourist seasons are scallop season, which we're in the middle of right now, manatee season in the wintertime, and then fishing kind of trickles in all year as far as tourism is concerned. All of those are dependent on seagrass.
Well, seagrasses are flowering plants that occur in marine ecosystems, much like their freshwater cohorts. We think of like eelgrass or tape grass in freshwater ecosystems, and in Florida, we see them in the springs and rivers. Even though there are some subtle differences between seagrasses and their freshwater counterparts, they really function the same way ecologically. Seagrass has been around in Florida for a long time. Florida emerged from the sea about 35 million years ago. But we think the time frame of seagrass is about the same in Florida. And these plants basically create a carpet much like your yard. The grass in your yard, they're real thick, dense mats of grass, and they provide a lot of habitat and other ecosystem services. For an area the size of a football field of seagrass, that ecosystem could support tens of thousands of fish and likely millions of invertebrates. So So we think about seagrasses as having tremendous economic impact on our coastal communities, and for several reasons. One, of course, there's a lot of jobs associated with commercial fishing and guide fishing, but also just the industry of sport fishing brings tourism to our coastal communities, and those seagrasses are an integral part of that. And the economic impact from losing them is substantial, in the billions of dollars per year in lost tourism revenue.
We are known in Crystal River as the home of the manatees. We have so many manatees here because we have lots of springs with warm water refuge. We have lots and lots of seagrass now, all the way out to the end of the river. It's a very safe environment. The water's so clear now that you can see the manatees in the water, and you don't have to worry about hitting them with your boat, a boat strike. People can come right up next to them in a kayak, and they just lift their noses up and smile at you. And people have seen lots of babies born behind their homes because it's such a refuge that the manatees are loved by everybody, and they feel safe here. My favorite part is to watch a little kid the very first time they see a manatee, and they're in the water. This just happened last year. Got in the water and she's swimming along. She was about 4 years old. She's looking and she saw one, and she just came straight up out of the water and screaming, "Daddy, I see one!" You know, she was so excited, and she's waving everybody over. She'll never forget it. She will love manatees forever because of that experience. And that's what swimming with the manatees gives to people, is they fall in love and they never get over it. You have to have seagrass in order to have a healthy economy, a healthy community, healthy water to drink. You don't want to swim in dirty water that smells and you can't see in it. You want that nice clean water like you see out there now. It's clean, it's clear, it's beautiful. If we lose the seagrass in the state of Florida, it's not just the manatees that will suffer. Everything will suffer.
Back when I was a kid, the seagrass was so thick here, the water was crystal clear. They call it gin clear, and it was like the Keys. Miles of seagrass, absolutely miles. There was so many fish. Any little hole, any little depression in the sand out there, you would find your predator fish that you were targeting out there. And if it was not the predator fish you're out there looking for, you're not fishing when you were a kid back then, the wildlife, the manatees, the dolphins you would see. We would get excited seeing manatees. You know, as far as the timeline of the Indian River dying, I've seen it firsthand. First we lost our water flow, then we lost our oysters, and then we had a huge population bloom. We lost our clams after that, and when we lost our clams, we had a freeze in 2011. All the nutrients blacked out the water. We lost our seagrass, and you got what we got today. It looks like, you know, Space Coast has definitely got the name right here because it looks like a moonscape out on our flats now.
There's been a major decline of seagrass here in the Indian River Lagoon due to a decline in water quality, and that has been attributed to an increase in nutrients. Studies have found that the leading cause of these nutrients is sewage from septic tanks, with fertilizers and stormwater runoff also playing an important role. In the Indian River Lagoon, we have actually seen a 58% decrease in seagrass habitat just since 2009. In the state of Florida, we've seen about a 50% decline in all of our seagrass in the last 50 years.
There were so many jobs lost along the Indian River Lagoon system. There were thousands of people out here, clammers, oyster dredgers, fishing guides, bars along the river. The boats aren't out there because you have red tide in the river now. People start, you know, breathing in this stuff, and you get warnings, don't go out on the river, don't breathe the air from the river. Nobody wants to go out and see manatee swim by the boat with a rib sticking out, or a dead manatee floating by your boat, or a dead porpoise floating by because of water pollution. It's something that we could have fixed a long time ago, but we sat on our hands too long and we got what we got now.
Seagrasses are very important to manatees because this is their food source. Manatees can consume approximately 100 pounds of seagrass a day. And so unfortunately, when we start to lose seagrass, we start to see manatees become sick and starve.
So the manatee die-off in this last 18 months has been unprecedented.
In Florida, we've lost almost 2,000 manatees. So that's approximately a quarter of the population statewide.
This unprecedented die-off of manatees really gets to the heart of the problem that we have here. Losing one of those iconic pieces of where we live is like losing a bit of yourself. And I think a lot of people will identify with that. That is a representation of what we do and what we strive to protect. And having this massive die-off has been nothing short of catastrophic, not only for the environment, but for us as Floridians too. So there's a fine line to walk with seagrass restoration, and it requires those elements, not only the propagation of the plants and the available opportunities and funding to put them in place, but also to ensure the water quality will sustain them. And there has been success. We've seen success in seagrass restoration projects around the state, but it requires more than just those of us planting and restoring seagrasses. It's got to be a groundswell movement.
Because the decline of seagrass is relatable to water quality, we really need to take a step back and fix the problem at hand first. There's a lot of restoration that can be done, but the restoration really needs to better understand how to restore an impaired water quality or allow us to fix infrastructure to allow restoration to take place properly.
There were quite a few water quality issues that were facing Crystal River. We had large algae blooms, and eventually we lost all of our SAV. When Crystal River really realized that there was a problem with water quality, a lot of the community got together. They took just samples of muck and algae up to Tallahassee. They put it on the desks of all the people that matter, and they really wanted to fix the problem. So that's when Sea and Shoreline joined Save Crystal River in the effort. And we started by removing all of the detritus, the muck from the bottom, and planting SAV, native SAVs like eelgrass in Crystal River, and allowing it to flourish and really clean up the water. And the city itself really went back to restructuring their septic to sewer program, getting everybody off of any leaking septics and onto city sewers to help really improve the water quality along with the plants. It's one of those things that we're very proud that we have finally accomplished. We have hit that tipping point to where we have now an SAV, a plant-dominated system versus an algae-dominated system. But it was a lot of little things that led to that tipping point. Thanks to the community's help, thanks to the city's help.
There's a few things out there that can be done in the immediate future that are going to make drastic changes, such as septic to sewer, such as getting educated on how to fertilize your grass, when to fertilize your grass. Education is the key.
I think we can recover from our mistakes as we learn. As a scientist, sometimes the work we do is kind of wears on you as you see a lot of decline. But the real benefit of the kind of work we're doing here is that we get to work with amazing people. There's scientists, there's activists, there's environmental folks from every different walk of life engaged in this process. And that really makes me feel like I'm a part of something big and that we have a true shot at success.
I'm very hopeful for the future of aquatic seagrasses in the state of Florida because I think the awareness has been raised. I'm a native Floridian, so I know what it used to be. A lot of people do, but there's a lot of people that are new to the state, and they have to understand that you're not guaranteed this beautiful, clean water anywhere in the state. You have to work for it. You have to get involved. You have to talk to your legislators when they come to town and say, water is important to us. Whether you're new to Florida or whether you've been here for generations, either way, you've got to have clean water. You've got to have seagrass, or you're not going to have anything. You owe it as your own legacy to future generations to please keep the water clean. Protect the seagrass because that's the basis of the food chain.
Great, thank you. All right, panelists, if I can ask you to put your videos on. Okay, so Vincent and I are gonna get us all started while you all participants, you can start entering your questions in the chat. But I think Vincent wanted to start off with sort of a status of the IRL question. So go for it, Vincent.
Yeah, and thanks again to all of you panelists for sitting in, and for all the audience here. I hope that was to me that the movie is very well done and very inspiring, Connor. So thank you for all that as well. I just wanted to ask any of the panelists, if you can comment on the current state of seagrass in the I'm going to keep it to the Indian River Lagoon right now. If you can comment on the current state of seagrass.
Lauren?
Hey, everyone. We do a biannual mapping of seagrasses in the lagoon, and we do that for the entire lagoon. And that's a really great way for us to get a snapshot of the footprint that we currently have. Our last round of mapping was done in 2023, and we were excited to see that we did have an increase in seagrass in 2023 from our 2021 coverage. But that increase was not everywhere. We didn't see it uniformly distributed throughout the lagoon. So most of that increase was in the northern IRL and in the southern Mosquito Lagoon. 2024, we have seen further increase since that 2023 map was done, but we won't get another round of seagrass mapping until 2025. So we've seen some from our transect data, seen some of these increases, but until we get that next big picture snapshot, we won't be able to tell you what that increase has been acreage-wise.
Great, thank you. Do any of our panelists want to add to that?
I can just add a little bit to Lauren, just to complement that. The transects have always been very complementary to our lagoon-wide mapping, and they do show the same kind of spatial trends that we're seeing more increases in the extreme north and in the furthest south areas. That central, where we have a lot more things, a lot more areas that have the water quality still needs some work. We're still seeing much slower recovery in that. But the amount of recovery we've seen in some of our more less developed areas, I suppose we can call it, is phenomenal. I mean, I didn't expect to be able to see that again. So it's been pretty awesome.
Thank you. Bob, you have a comment?
Yes, to echo, but put those two comments together, we tend to assess seagrass loss by mapping or by acres, but the transects also show that the density of seagrass has decreased about an order of magnitude. And so that's the decrease in biomass. So we miss that. So that to rely only on the seagrass mapping, I think misleads of a bit of how bad the loss is. And I'd like to make one other comment, that you get responses, you need to clean up, and Lori was the only one that really identified the source. I mean, we talk about water quality, but in the Indian River Lagoon, it's primarily nutrients. The work of Brian LaPointe shows most of those nutrients are coming from human sewage. There was an Indian River Lagoon Act passed 1996. I'm not sure the date, where you couldn't discharge wastewater to the lagoon, and it wasn't based so much on science. It was, we don't want to swim in our own crap. And I will say, I just came back from Switzerland, and Switzerland has made all of their lakes and all of their rivers swimmable, which is quite remarkable. They spent tens of billions of dollars for a small country, 8 million people, to do that, but they celebrate that. And I think when people say it's expensive to clean up the lagoon, I'd say it's expensive not to clean up the lagoon.
That's a fantastic point. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, and I mean, you know, at the end of the day, the Water Ambassador Program is sort of a stormwater, water quality, nutrient management program. So acknowledging that the sources of nutrients are coming from the communities around. So I'm going to follow up on a question. So we fortunately saw that, seagrasses maybe are a little bit more resilient than we thought with some of this regrowth. So maybe this will be to Ryan or Connor. What role should restoration of seagrasses play in sort of the whole ecosystem function? So what is the role of restoration?
Yeah, I can certainly speak to that. I think it's one of the many pieces of the puzzle, right? We talked about the water quality issues and talked about nutrient loading specifically in the Indian River Lagoon. But oftentimes what you see is there's always a rate limiting factor that's preventing seagrass from either occurring naturally or from recovering. And so speaking as Sea and Shoreline, we have the goal of growing out seagrasses in nurseries to be used for outplanting. But outplanting is one of the final steps, right? You got to make sure that the conditions are viable, are suitable, and when they are, it's determining the time is right, and then having those plants ready to go to jumpstart that restoration. And so outplanting specifically, again, it's one piece, but restoration and conservation in terms of doing anything we can from environmental stewards, making sure we're paying attention to our own footprint, our own backyard, and things like that is very important.
I think that another role that restoration can play is in helping future-proof our ecosystems in terms of climate change. So we're seeing stronger heat waves, and in South Florida, some areas broke triple digits in water temperature, which is staggering. So obviously, like extinction level event for the corals in South Florida. Seagrasses are more resilient, but we're also having issues with seagrass and their vulnerability to temperature as well. So a part of restoration is determining what strains of seagrasses can be more resilient to certain disturbances or environmental variables. And that is also something that restoration and the associated groups working in restoration are working on.
Thank you. Bob?
A little bit of a dissenting view that restoration can mean lots of things, and we ought to clarify that you're asking questions about planting and augmenting restoration. And Lauren may want to chime in. Seagrass recovered quite well in Mosquito Lagoon, despite the presence of hundreds of manatees. Lauren, how much seagrass was planted in Mosquito Lagoon?
As you know, Bob, none. So as far as the plantings go, one thing that we're looking into as well is, are there areas that are not recovering naturally? And maybe those could be the areas that we could focus some of these plantings on. So areas that are recovering on their own obviously don't need our help. They need our help to keep up that water quality good, but they don't necessarily need us to go out there and put plants in the ground. So if we can find those areas that do need that assisted plantings, then that could really help us. And we're working on a lot of that, trying to figure out, where do we have a seed bank? Is there an area that maybe seagrass is not going to grow back on its own because it's so far from areas with existing seagrass? So that Cocoa to Melbourne, Palm Bay area really has very little seagrass present right now. And from what we're seeing, it doesn't have the seed bank that we thought we might need for seagrass to recover on its own. So maybe those areas, once the water quality has been cleaned up, can be where we focus some of these planting efforts.
Well, and I also wanted to speak on a project that was conducted last year, where it's just south of Melbourne, we conducted a restoration project with seagrass, and we saw incredible growth, up to 40 or 50% cover in like 3 months. But the seagrass wasn't anywhere else. And part of this, well, crucially, we had fencing up, herbivory exclusion fencing. And when we took that down, there was literally a manatee watching us take the fencing down. And when we took it down, like a month afterward, there were barely any shoots of seagrass. And I checked last month to see if there was anything, and there wasn't. So I think that the type of restoration we can do can help potentially build a seed bank, or at least build these established seagrass beds in some of these regions that we're sort of exploring seagrass restoration in. And I think another like, restoration is not a silver bullet, but there are some things that restoration can help with, including speeding up succession. It's called successional compression, where you plant seagrasses, you initiate the plantings, for example, in seagrass scars, so that you avoid having a multi-decade period of like halidulae slowly growing in and then thalassia growing in. You plant the halidulae, you fill in the scar. You're artificially affecting that environment that's been damaged so that it can repair itself as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you.
Lisa, we've got one question in the comments.
Yep.
A question in the chat, and then a couple comments. Sorry.
Yeah. So the first question is, what's the proper range of salinity or freshwater for seagrass, and how can it be affected by rain and discharge? And then the comment, although perhaps not intended, I think is actually sort of linked to that question. And the comment is that over the past few weeks, we've had noticed incredible amounts of floating manatee grass gathered along seawalls of the Indian River Lagoon and Fort Pierce area. So I'm wondering if maybe there's why you would have sort of, disrupted seagrass and have it be floating and dislodged from the sediments. So if we can talk about the salinity range first, and I'm going to ask Lorraine if you can tackle this and maybe speak about the different types of seagrasses, because we have more than one species in the lagoon, and the range of those seagrasses, and then maybe why we would see dead floating seagrass.
Yeah, thank you. So I will say that I was going to default to Lori on this, because I know that she has actually written a paper and done her life work on trying to do better.
But then default away.
Because not every seagrass has the same salinity tolerance, right? I'll just say in general, if I'm remembering back correctly from her paper, we were using around 23 parts per thousand. So not freshwater, not like full strength seawater. And what happens is when you have a bunch of fresh water, it just disrupts the way that the seagrass can osmoregulate, or the way that it can grow properly. It needs to have some salt. And so when you have long periods of rainfall or discharges from Lake O, or anything that really disrupts the timing, duration, and intensity of fresh water coming into the system, you will eventually stress that seagrass. And it will either die, or it might just be knocked back for the season. What we see a lot here in the Indian River Lagoon, unfortunately, is you have these pulses of fresh water, you have these periods of time that you start to stress the seagrass, and then you have a harmful algal bloom that comes in behind it and stresses it even more. And so it's this continuous perturbations to this system that eventually knock the seagrass and kill it. But in the specifics of the seagrasses, and there's 7 different seagrass species in the Indian River Lagoon in different ranges throughout the IRL, I can let Lori go on a deep dive on that for you guys.
All right, Lori, floor is yours.
Sure. No, Lorraine, but she got it right on. So, yeah, the 7 species we have. Halidulae wrightii shoalgrass is our dominant species that's found throughout the entire range of the lagoon, along with Syringodium, and that's the manatee grass. And the other ones are kind of come and go. So we typically have Rupia more in the north. We don't have it as far south. And the Halophila species, Anglemanii, the star one, can be found throughout the lagoon, but Halophila decipiens and Anglemanii are further south, as well as Thalassia. There seems to be kind of a line around Sebastian as the northern limit for those more tropical species of Thalassia, Halophila decipiens, and Halophila johnsonii. And they do each kind of have their ranges of salinity tolerances, light tolerances, temperature tolerances. So we do kind of try to work with a mean of when we're thinking about what everyone likes. But number one is light. They need light. And that's where the phytoplankton blooms and algae and, not being able to see through the water is number one. And if they don't have light, then, its salinity and temperature are even going to compound things further. So we have to get that light going. Now, as far as the question on seeing the leaves, and typically you won't see whole plants, you'll see leaves. A lot of the seagrasses, especially Haliduli, has 5 leaves on each shoot, and they'll slough off their outer ones. And typically that happens. These are, normal plants, just like your yard grass. So they start dying back as our days now are starting to get shorter. We have less light. We also have water levels increase in the fall. So we're coming into that water level increasing. So they're getting a little bit less light because of the extra water on top of them, and day length is changing. So we'll see a natural senescence kind of the plants, and they'll start sloughing off some of their older leaves. So what might look like a die-off is actually a natural thing. And, just because we haven't seen as much seagrass in the water for a couple of years, everyone's freaking out a little. But now that we're getting to see seagrass again, and, people are getting more used to it, it's kind of a natural thing. And don't freak out. They're still hopefully doing okay. We don't know of any big events that have been happening out there.
Thank you for that moment of relief for all of us. Bob?
Just a comment on the distribution of Syringodium, manatee grass. It is found throughout the lagoon, but in the Melbourne area where there are several tributaries coming in and the salinity fluctuates rather widely and sometimes it's rather low, Syringonium's a really minor player there. There's really not much found, but in the northern lagoon, it's quite abundant. So Syringodium and Thalassia are very intolerant of low salinities. Some of the other grasses like Haliduli are quite tolerant. And I can't say this with extremely high confidence, but with pretty good confidence that a lot of the floating Syringodium may come from grazers, that at this time of the year when pinfish start to get about this size, they become herbivorous and they eat seagrass. And the way they eat seagrass is by biting it at the base. So you might look at blades and look, are they clipped off and really bitten off? So the base of the blade is more nutritious, and they feed on that, and you get a lot of blades floating off from pinfish biting the bottom of seagrass blades, and then they go floating, and Syringodium blades are very buoyant, at least during the day when they're generating lots of oxygen.
Lorraine?
I just wanted to follow up to that point that Bob made about the herbivory, because it is a very important point. And oftentimes you'll hear from various stakeholders that where you don't see seagrass, all the seagrass is gone because of some macro grazers and also maybe these micro grazers. And, in a healthy ecosystem, this is part of the process. These plants have almost adapted to be more productive when they get snapped or bit down at the base. And so as the pinfish eats a little bit of that leaf will actually grow more. And so we're starting to see maybe this difference in distribution or the density, not because of these herbivores in general, it's because we've lost so much, right? And so instead of these grazers being able to move to a different place, they go back to the same spot all the time. And so just bringing it back to, in a healthy ecosystem, all of these things work in concert with one another, and that to get back there, we really need to focus on our water quality.
That's a really important point in recognizing that, seeing these leaves maybe is part of that healthy ecosystem functioning, which is going to take me to my next question. So how quickly can restored seagrass areas provide these ecosystem services? I'm going to open that up to everyone.
Isn't that the $1 million question?
Yeah,
And
I'd
I
love
think
to know the
everyone is
answer to
keeping their-
this.
No one wants to answer.
Yeah, that's a really hard question, but which I can't answer, being honest. But I can speak to a different example, a project that Connor highlighted in the video, and that's the Crystal River project. And it's very different system. Kings Bay is mainly freshwater, spring-fed bay that flows out into the river, and so. The project was restoring Vallisneria americana, which is a freshwater macrophyte that was mentioned. And it took about 4 years for the system to reach the tipping point that was mentioned. And I remember in year 2, we were celebrating because we found the first female flower that was not under a protective cage. And it was sandwiched between 2 rocks, right? And like 4 inches of water, impossible for anything to get to it. And it's this little tiny flower, spiraling up to the surface. And fast forward into year 4, we found no difference in canopy height, density, or percent cover under a cage versus outside of a cage, because those plants had, at whatever point, reached that tipping point. And that's where we started to see those ecosystem services really, kick in. Not only the ecosystem services, but the ecotourism as well. The water got cleaner, prettier, right? There were more fish around, more manatees, which meant more kayaking, more boaters, more swimmers, and just an overall healthier system. And so I think everyone was quiet because it's impossible, I think, to predict how long that will take in a different area or in a specific ecosystem. But it can be done. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
Lauren, you want to add?
I just wanted to say that this is a perfect question to emphasize the importance of collecting data. And, every project that we're doing, getting good data on those projects can help us answer questions like this. We want to know not just the successes, but we also want to know about the failures and what went wrong and why did that go wrong. So that question, really just kind of makes me think of the importance in collecting good data and sharing that data with all of our colleagues.
Thank you. And Bob?
A comment based on two kinds of experiments, and I would say build it and they will come. We at one point with a Harbor Branch postdoc dyed all the animals within square meter plots, and about half of those turned over nightly. I mean, they moved out of the plot and other organisms moved in. Also, if you put out clumps of artificial seagrass, even like 15 meters away from a grass bed, you get pretty high recruitment in a day and even overnight. And within a week, they sort of plateau out. So that part, I think, is really quick. For some of the top predators and manatees, yeah, that's going to take longer. For a lot of the invertebrates and the small fishes, that happens, I want to say almost not instantly, but very rapidly. And I don't think it's something that we should worry about.
Thank you. Connor?
Yeah, just to back up Bob's point, when we did restore seagrasses in the Melbourne area last year, almost immediately we had, growth. Like in the first 3 months, I mean, the growth absolutely exploded, and you could see hundreds of different, invertebrates and fish, and it was quite an incredible little community that we had. It was contingent on the fencing being up, and the fencing could provide some bias because it's technically a structure, but we saw sheepshead and mangrove snapper and tons of pinfish, and it's something that we're seeing as well in both of the restoration projects that we have in Fort Pierce and behind our backup property. So when it comes to some of the ecosystem services, it's pretty immediate and can have some significant benefits depending on the size of the project.
Thank you. Lorraine?
So to pull Connor, Bob, and Lauren's comments all together, because there are a lot of ecosystem services, right? I think as people that live on the water or recreate in the water, the first thing that comes to mind is the fish and the manatees and all of the critters coming back or moving back into the structure, which is it sounds like it could happen overnight or within a few short months. But there's a lot of other ecosystem services that we don't necessarily see with our naked eye. So we have carbon sequestration and nutrient cycling, shoreline protection and erosion control. And these are ones that can take a lot longer. Some of these can take up to 10 years, depending on the system. And so just going back to number one, collecting the data, but collecting the data to answer the question that you're most interested in, and the things that are going to really drive the way that we should be restoring, or drive the way we should be, thinking about this system as a whole. Because if you don't have the nutrient cycling, you aren't going to have a productive system, and that productive system isn't going to lead to the fisheries habitat that you hope. And so it's the beauty of ecology, right? Everything interplays with one another, and some questions take a lot longer to answer.
So we talked about light sort of being the primary limiting factor in terms of seagrass growth, and a lot of that is due to those external sources of nutrients. And so all along the Indian River Lagoon, as Bob mentioned, as Lori mentioned, we're doing these restoration projects to reduce our nutrient inputs. But that also takes time to see water quality improvement. So someone want to maybe talk about the time it takes for water quality to respond to reduced nutrients? Oh no, I'm seeing grumbles.
Well, I won't speak on the timing, because I think that really depends on where you are in the system. And one thing about the Indian River Lagoon is it's 156 miles long. There are some areas that are located right next to an inlet. So you have this tidal flushing that takes place daily or weekly, whereas there's other parts of the lagoon where it has been shown that water can be stuck and sit in that area for anywhere between 1 to 3 years. And so, that legacy of nutrients that are sitting in that water column is going to be a lot different in order how to remediate that than it will be somewhere as like by the St. Lucie or the Fort Pierce Inlet.
And if you can predict what the weather is going to do from one year to the next, you'd definitely be ahead of the game. That's the other magic question.
Yeah. And that's a tough one to study. I mean, it's not like you instantaneously decrease nutrient input to the lagoon, so you get time zero to follow. But I think there are examples like in Sarasota Bay where they have spent billions of dollars and seagrass has recovered. I'm not sure of the timeline, but I think there's an example that we could look at. And I'll say that Dave Tomasco, who I really adore, is the head of the National Estuary Program there, and he will use the line, "We don't want to be like the Indian River Lagoon." And I think, wow, we could. I mean, the seagrasses, when they were healthy, contributed just in the fisheries probably over $1 billion a year. Why not spend a couple $1 billion for cleanup of sewage and get a return of $1 billion a year is a big deal. That's a good return on an investment. But I think the example from Sarasota Bay, where they have spent lots of money and seen a recovery of seagrass, is one place to look.
Connor, and while we wait for Connor to talk, I also want to encourage you all to put your questions and thoughts in the chat. Connor?
One thing I just wanted to add too, that sometimes isn't discussed, but I think is getting more traction, is co-restoration. So like hard clams, which Blair Wiggins talked about briefly in his interview, were a really important part of the Indian River Lagoon as well. And in the early 2000s, the Indian River Lagoon got utterly ravaged, the seagrasses and the clams. So basically, he told me that back in the day, they used to have a line of commercial boats from one end of the lagoon to the other, and they would just go through and they would dredge the bottom of seagrass and clams. And the clams provided some really important value, not only to people, but also to the seagrass itself. So they helped filter some nutrients, similar to oysters. So yeah, I just thought I'd add that into the mix a little bit, because I know it's about seagrass restoration, but a part of returning the Indian River Lagoon to its original state involves reintroducing some of those species, and doing that co-restoration can also help accelerate the return of our seagrasses as well.
Great, thank you. And so I asked the $1 million question, which was maybe too hard to answer. So I'm going to go to like the $100,000 question. And from all of you are coming at this from very different perspectives. So I want to gather your different perspectives, whether it's from a management, from a research, from a consultant point of view. With seagrass restoration, what does success look like? How do you measure success? Ryan, I know you want to tackle this.
I'll give it my best shot. Yeah, so from a restoration practitioner perspective, I mean, success is being able to restore plants, right? Having more plants in the system than when you started, especially when you're able to compare that to a control site, and you can see that the restoration efforts are actively, contributing towards that success. I think end goal, right? Best case scenario is to take a system where seagrass has not recovered or has died off, and ultimately restore it, right? Get it back to a system that supports seagrass and all the ecosystem services that come with that. I think, and it's a hard one to answer. We sometimes say the only failed project is one where you don't learn anything from. And so if a project is not as successful as you might want, right, best case scenario, just gathering the data to understand what went right, what went wrong, and how to address those issues moving forward for the better of future projects.
Thank you. Anyone else want to address that? Yeah, Lori.
To me, it would be back to a self-sustaining system, one that is a little more resilient again and can handle if something happens, but is able to continue with its self-improvements and just, going on. I mean, the system was like that. It could take little, we would have some blooms every now and then in the fall, but the system would recover from that, and it wouldn't be as massive as what we had seen in the past. So I think, being able to have more of the self-sustaining and less, more tolerant to impacts.
Thank you, Lorraine. And before you talk, Lorraine, those of you, we are sort of running up to our 1 o'clock hour, so I'm just going to launch our evaluation poll. So you don't get to leave before you complete these 4 quick questions. But with that, Lorraine, I want you to address, and then we do have 3 minutes left, and now we're getting all the questions in the chat. So.
Yes, exactly what Lori said, and being this is a self-sustaining population or community, right? And I think that self-sustaining isn't just that density piece, though. It is all the ecosystem service is working in concert with one another, and that we can look back in 10 years and see, or whatever that timeline is, and say, yes, this is a self-sustaining population that is contributing to every essence of this habitat and the biodiversity of our system.
Fantastic. Okay, we have a great one. Are you optimistic for the future of seagrass restoration in the IRL?
I'm very optimistic, and I'm optimistic for a couple of reasons. One, I think we've seen some pretty amazing things in the last couple of years. I know that things can turn around and go the other way pretty quickly, but the fact that the seagrass has come back as fast as it has when the conditions were good makes me very optimistic. And the other reason is because we have a community throughout the entire 156 miles of the lagoon that is really excited about seagrass restoration, and they really love their lagoon. And I think that community, when you look at Brevard County, for example, that voted to tax themselves to try to raise money to restore the lagoon, that speaks volumes. So I'm really optimistic for both of those reasons.
Connor?
I think that I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think that in light of certain issues, the major one for me is population growth. Our population continues to spiral out of control in Florida. I think it's 1,200 people a day, which we can, in an ideal scenario, we can accept those people and be able to continue making water quality improvements. It'll just be extremely difficult, especially on a policy level, especially when, lately we've had some policy decisions that were not ideal. For example, the suggestion to put a golf course in Dickinson State Park, I think, is indicative of the challenge that we have to restore some of our ecosystems and also deal with growth, which is oftentimes unsustainable. But I think that the direction that things are going is positive, and hopefully we can keep the momentum going. So fingers crossed.
Thank you. And on that optimistic, positive note, it is 1 o'clock and I want to end there. I think, all of your experiences and your sentiment is a testament to all of the work and efforts that are happening in the IRL. So I want to thank you all so much for your work on behalf of the IRL, but also for your participation on the panel today. I think we had some great dialogue and some great conversation. So thank you all so much for your willingness to join us today.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa and Vincent.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for attending, and look for this recording probably within a week or so. We'll have it on our UF-IFAS Extension Martin County YouTube channel.
Is there any other follow-up with that, a summary or